Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Like we said, my name is Lucy Holland, and I'm here to talk to you about what I do, which is write music for games. And so, first, a bit about where I got started in music for games and how I got to write music. The first thing I'd say for anyone who likes games and maybe also likes music is to have a little think to yourself now, are there any games you've played where the music has caught your attention in some way? So, since I can remember, I've always been a big fan of games. And when I was a kid and a bit younger, these are some of the games that I used to play where I really noticed and loved the music for different reasons. So there's one here called Monkey Island, which was a puzzle adventure game where you play as a pirate, and it had some really funky music. I loved the Zelda games. I still love the Zelda games. That have got such an amazing array of music that brings it to life. The Pikmin games have got some really interesting music that changes in really fun ways, and we'll touch on that a few times a little bit later. Broken Sword was another puzzle game that had a really beautiful score and it did things really differently. And that was something I noticed when I was playing it. And another set of games are the Final Fantasy games, which some of you might know of, that has some really exciting music in it. And I really loved The Sims as well, which introduced me to different types of music, like jazz music. It had lots of different genres in the score and in the soundtrack. So I became interested in learning more about how to compose because I was questioning, where did this music in the game happen? Where did it come from? Who made it? And it turns out that music in games happens and is made in lots of different ways, but it usually starts with a games music composer. So I was really interested in how do you get to be a games music composer? And so this is where my journey took me. First of all, I started by learning to play an instrument at school. I learned to play the oboe while I was at primary school. And after school, I went on to study music at university. And while studying, I also focused especially on writing music, but also played and learned lots about music by playing with other musicians in orchestras and bands. And I also started to work with other people who were making films or short games. And I would practice by working with them, and we'd create something together. And so then once I finished university, it was all about meeting as many people in games as I could. And in Scotland and the UK, we have a really vibrant and creative community of people who are making all kinds of games. So for me, I got to meet lots of really amazing people and get to know their work. But alongside that, as well as working with games, I've also earned a living as a musician by writing and playing music for other projects. So learning music and being creative does come with lots of skills that can also be useful in other jobs. But ultimately, with practice and hard work over time, I worked with lots of different game developers and studios to make music for their games. And I learned about the process and I worked with other people to learn from them. And now I'm what's called a freelance composer, which means I don't work for a single game studio or company. Studios hire me to write the music they need when they need it. So I work for lots of different places. And one thing that is important to note with all this in mind about my journey, if you're somebody who's maybe interested in a career in games or music, or even games music together, there are quite a few ways, different ways of building a career and getting there. So my way isn't the only way. This is just where my musical journey has taken me. So now I've told you a bit about how I got here to be a games composer. How about I tell you a little bit about what it's actually like writing music for games? And the first question I would ask is, well, what's special about games music? And one thing is that unlike a film, a game can change in lots of ways. So it's important that the music can change too, so that it can help somebody better understand the game, the person who's playing it. So here are some examples to get us thinking about how music might have been used in games to help the player understand what's going on. So first, if you were to think of some of the Mario or Mario Kart games, well, what happens when you collect a star? Essentially, you power up and the music changes to help show that something's happened to your character. Another example, we mentioned it earlier, it's in Pikmin. In Pikmin, if you're near something important, like an enemy or a bit of treasure, different instruments will play in the music so that your attention is drawn to something being different. And we'll come back to Pikmin a little bit more later as well, because there's so many interesting things in the Pikmin music. Another example is in lots of adventure and role-playing games like Zelda. The music might change depending on the environment you're in or what's around you, your surroundings. So if you're in a safe place, it might sound different to if suddenly an enemy has entered and you've gone into a combat mode. And if anything, most of the time, music should really help tell you what kind of game it is and help to set the mood, to help a player really feel how you want them to feel and to know what the game should feel like. So if you were to think about your favorite game, if you have one, just think about it now. What does the music for that game say to you about it? Does it sound like it feels? And basically, that's my job as a games composer. It's to find the sound and try and create the very best music to support the game and help the player or whoever is playing the game understand it and ultimately give them a better experience. So it's about helping the game to feel more alive and connected to the player. And to give you a bit of an idea of how game composers actually make the music work, here are a couple of examples. So how do we put music into a game? Well, when somebody's making a game designer, they use a software called a game engine, and that pulls together all the bits that make a game, and game composers do something similar by using a bit of software called an audio engine. So if anybody here has been building a game in Scratch, that is like a version of an engine where you can put the art and the sound and the programming and the story, and it all gets put into one package. And as composers, we do the same thing for the music, just in a very specific type of engine. And that means that we can implement and put the music into the game so that it can match what the player might do or how the game changes, like some of the examples we just looked at. And it's not always the same process as a film where the music is synchronized from start to finish, as the time in a game, as we know, can vary. So ideally, the music wants to have a bit more flexibility to move and change if needed. And that means sometimes the music, actually the music files themselves have to be prepared differently. So stay with me. One way of doing this is to write the game's music in lots of different sections, like we can see here. It's like slices of bread or segments of an orange, I like to think of it as. And basically that means that essentially these little chunks could be reordered. So different parts of the music can change depending on what happens in the game. So if you imagine that this is one whole piece of music that's been cut into different sections, and you imagine that there's a bit of music here in section 1, but it's composed so that it could either go to section 2, but if needed, maybe it could also jump to 3 or 4 if the feeling and the music needs to change. And then there's an example here where maybe 4 could split off into 2 versions if needed. And then maybe we can go back to the start or we can jump somewhere else. It's all about giving you more control over how the music could change or might be needed to change. And it also gives you lots more possible combinations for how the music will sound to give you some variety. So it just gives you a bit more than a song that's on a loop. This means that during it, it's potentially not always going to sound the same, and it just keeps your interest. And there's a game called Sackboy, a big adventure that does this. It uses a similar technique where it's using musical segments to build the action. And in this, you'll see there's a boss fight, and the boss fight's getting more intensive. And it shows you when the states of the music change. There's 3 states, and then there's an outro section. So I will play it and see if you can notice the music changing in any way. And just so you know, the music's been written by the award-winning composer, who's amazing, Winifred Phillips. So fun. So hopefully, even if you didn't hear exactly what was happening in the music there, hopefully you could still tell that it was changing and becoming more energetic to match the action on screen. And this here is an example of another game that does something similar using those musical sections. This is a game called Untitled Goose Game. You play as that goose, and your whole challenge is just to make chaos happen and make things really difficult for everyone. It's great fun. And as it gets busier and you get up to more mischief, the piano music that you hear, it's prepared in little short sections, and those sections will start to get busier and I think more frequent to represent all the chaos that's going on in the scene and kind of like encourage the player to do that more. So again, the music is really telling the player, it's giving them more information and feedback. And so that was one way that composers in games sometimes prepare music. Another way is instead of splitting the music into those horizontal chunks, like the slices of bread, you can section it into layers and stack musical instruments or different musical ideas on top of each other, like Lego bricks. And I mentioned Pikmin earlier, so we're revisiting it again. The music in Pikmin is amazing. It's so layered and interactive in lots of different ways. And this is a short video where the speaker actually does a really great example of describing all the different ways that the music in Pikmin enhances the story and the characters, how different instruments as well as musical changes give it all character and variety. So have a little listen to this.
Pikmin 2, like the entries that came before and after, has a dynamic music system. This means the BGM for the area you're in will alter based on several variables. First is whether you're Olimar or Louie. Olimar's variant is very rigid and consistent, like the man himself, while Louie's has a swing to it, giving it a looser feel. There's also a night variant of each area theme that replaces the instruments with a music box. There are also stems for Pikmin working, carrying a treasure, which can only be heard while working, being near a spiderwort berry, a nearby enemy, and battling an enemy, which can only be heard when an enemy is nearby. If you do the math on this means there are 72 combinations. All cave music gets the same treatment, though without the night or berry version, so it's 18 variants. Pikmin 2.
So yeah, it's amazing. 72 combinations that are possible for how the music might change in Pikmin. And again, hopefully, even if you didn't know exactly what was changing, you could hear some of those changes based on what's around you. And it all makes it feel more alive, just makes it feel like the game is reacting, like the player is having some kind of impact on what's going on. And here's another example. This is from a game called Hollow Knight, and it also used this technique. In Hollow Knight, there's lots of different areas that all have their own tone and atmosphere. And what you might hear in the music in those areas is different instruments coming in and out so that it feels maybe busier and more intense, or less busy and kind of more intimate and quiet. And so that's the technique, that layered technique, or a similar one that I used when I worked on a game called Murderous Pursuits. This is a sneaky multiplayer game where your task is to find your target without being found by the other people who are looking for you. So the music needed to fill a lot of time in the right way so that it kept your attention to set the atmosphere, but without becoming too boring or repetitive. So I composed the music in lots of different layers that it could play back in different combinations and give you more variety. So just to give you a flavour, here's a short look at that game and the music now.
I bet that wasn't the nightcap they were expecting. Excellent, excellent. Done in with exceptional poise. Well done. Dashed fine work. Champagne and pin. Honestly, I take my eye off you.
So that gives you a little look at the Murderous Pursuits game and a listen to the music in it. And now here's a bit more of a look at the software I used where I actually wrote the music. So this is a music making tool called a digital audio workstation. Sometimes it's called a DAW for short, which is software that composers and musicians can use to create and record music and sound. And in this video, you'll get to see what the music files look like, and you'll also maybe see how the music has been split into different instruments, which are either groups of instruments like woodwind here, or strings and tuned percussion, or it might be solo instruments that have more of a melody like the dulcimer, or they might have an accompaniment like the accordion here. And in this video, it's a demonstration where I turn different instruments on and off. So you might be able to hear how different instruments coming in could change in the game. And it's a couple of minutes, so maybe see if you can notice what instruments are disappearing or coming back as we listen. So that's a bit about how music in games works, what it's like to be a games composer, and a look at some of the ways that you can write music so that it works in games. And I think that's probably about all I have time for now, but I hope it's been interesting for you. I'll quickly say, for anyone who might be interested in making music or games or both, I also work for a great group in Edinburgh called Tinderbox Collective, where we have music and games clubs. So you can take a look at our website if you're interested for any more information, or feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any questions. And actually later this year, we'll be bringing a showcase of games that we've made, but also that other people have made by young people to the North Edinburgh Community Festival in May. So if you might be interested in showing something there or anything you make as part of the Game Jam, the East Lothian Game Jam, just let us know as well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you found that interesting, and I'll end it there.